Hi everybody, welcome to GTCoding. In this tutorial series, we are creating this CRUD application using Next JS and AppWrite. Now in the previous video, we created the UI of the app and this is how it looks. So we have the add new page. We also have the edit page. So we can go over here to edit and add an ID. And here we have the edit page. So the user interface has been completed. Now in this video, we will create the API of our application. So let's get started. Now the first thing we will do is we will create an AppWrite project. So you can just go over here to cloud.appwrite.io and create a free account and log into the account. And you will be greeted with this screen right here. So let's click on create project and let's name our project. I'll just name it AppWrite CRUD and let's click on next. And let's select the default option and let's click on next. And now we can see that our project has been created. So we have this project named AppWrite CRUD. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to add a platform. So if you're developing for an app, you can just add the app over here. So you can add Flutter, Android and Apple. But we are developing for web. So let's click on web. And here let's name the web app. I'll just name it AppWrite CRUD. And here we need to type localhost because we are working on localhost right now. So let's click on next. And then here we can see it says we need to install AppWrite. So let's go back to our project and let's open the terminal and I'll just close the server and let's type npm install AppWrite and let's press enter. And AppWrite has been installed. So let's go back and let's click on next. And now we can see it says we need to add this code to initialize the SDK. So let's copy it and let's go back to our code and let's go outside the app folder. So we'll go to the root of our application and let's create a folder called lib. And in that we'll create a file called AppWrite_client.ts. And let's paste the code over here. And we need to import client from AppWrite. So let's go ahead and type import client from AppWrite. Right now let's go ahead and export this client so that we can use it in other files. So let's type export default client and I'll just store these values inside an environment variable. So let's go to the root of our project and let's create a new file called .env. And first of all, let's go to the git ignore and let's add this file over here. So we don't want to push this env file to the GitHub repo. So I'll just add it over here. And now let's go ahead and copy this right here. And let's paste it over here. I'll just name the value next_public_AppWrite_endpoint and let's paste the value over here. And then we have the project ID. So let's type next_public_AppWrite_project ID. And let's copy this and let's paste it over here. Right now let's go ahead and use this. So here I'll just type process.env.next_public_AppWrite_endpoint. Now TypeScript is giving me this error, so we need to type as string over here. And let's do the same for the project ID. So I'll just copy this and let's type process.env.projectID as string. And with this we have made the connection to the AppWrite project. Now let's go back to AppWrite and let's create a database. So let's click on next and let's go to the dashboard and let's go over here to databases and let's create a new database and I'll just call it AppWrite CRUD DB and let's click on create. And we can see that the database has been created. Now we need to use this database ID as well. So let's copy this and let's create a new environment variable called next_public_AppWrite database ID. And let's paste it over here. And now let's go ahead and create a collection. And let's name the collection interpretations. And even for the ID, I'll just type interpretations. And let's click on create. And we can see that the interpretations collection has been created. So now let's add the attributes. So let's click on create attribute and let's select string and let's name it term. And for the size, I'll just set it to 100 or let's type 150 and let's make it required and let's click on create. And let's create one more attribute, and let's name it interpretation. And let's set the size to, let's try 255. So these are basically characters, and let's set it as required, and let's click on create. So both these attributes have been added. Now the ID is automatically added by AppWrite. Right, now let's go back to our project, and let's start by creating the API. So let's create a new folder called API, and in this we'll create a new folder called interpretations, and in that we need to create a new file called route.ts, and I'll just go ahead and run this app. And now here the first thing we need to do is we need to import client from AppWrite client over here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's tap import client from AppWrite client. Right, now let's create a function for creating the interpretation. So I'll just create an async function, and let's call it create interpretation. And here we will get some data. Now for the data type will be an object with term string and interpretation string. And let's create this function, and let's add the code inside a try catch block. And here in the try, let's go ahead and create a const called response, and let's type await. And now we need to create an instance of databases from AppWrite. So here we need to type const database equals new databases, so we can import it from AppWrite. And here we need to pass the client, which you are getting from here. So here we need to type await database dot create document, and here we need to pass the database ID. So let's type process.env dot next public AppWrite database ID, and let's type as string. And the next thing we need to pass is the collection ID. So the collection ID is basically interpretations. So I'll just copy this and let's paste it over here. And the third thing we need to pass is the ID. Now for the ID, we can use ID from AppWrite. So let's import it from AppWrite, and we can just type .unique, and it will create a unique ID. And the last thing is the data. And now let's go ahead and return the response. And here in the catch, let's go ahead and type console.error. Let's type error creating interpretation, and let's pass the error over here, and let's throw new error, and let's type failed to create interpretation. Right, now let's create a function to fetch the interpretation. So I'll just copy this function and let's paste it down here. I'll just add a comment. So let's type create interpretation, and here let's type fetch interpretations, and here let's change the function name to fetch interpretations. And here we don't need to pass anything. And here in the try, we need to type await database list documents, and here we need to pass the database ID, the collection ID, and we'll also display the data in descending order by created date. So we need to add it inside an array, and let's type query, and let's import it from AppWrite .order descending, and here we need to pass the value. So AppWrite automatically creates this value called $created at. So let's use that, and let's return the response. Now in the response, it will give us documents. So let's return the documents. So let's type response.documents, and here in the error, let's type error fetching interpretations, and here let's type failed to fetch interpretations. Right, now let's create the post and the get function. So we need to type export async function post, and we get a request, and it is of type request. And here let's add a try catch block. Now here from the request, we will get the term and the interpretation. So let's type const, and let's destructure it. So let's type term interpretation from request.json, and we need to await this, and let's store these inside a const called data. So let's type term interpretation, and let's go ahead and call this function called create interpretation. So let's type const response equals await create interpretation, and let's pass the data, and let's go ahead and return a next response dot JSON, and here let's type message. Let's type interpretation added or created, and here in the error let's type return next response dot JSON error failed to create interpretation, and let's also send a status code. So let's type status of 500. Right now let's write the get function. So let's type export async function get, and here let's add a try catch block, and here let's type const interpretations equals await, and let's call this function called fetch interpretations, and let's return next response dot JSON, and we'll just return these interpretations. So just type interpretations, and here in the catch let's type return next response dot JSON error failed to fetch interpretations, and let's also send a status code of 500. Right now let's go ahead and check whether this works. So for this we will be using Postman. So you can download this application called Postman, and you can check the API routes over here. So let's click on this plus icon, and here let's type HTTP localhost, and our application is hosted at port 3001, and then we have API, and in that we have interpretations. So here we can see we have API, and in that we have interpretations, and in that we have the route.ts file. So let's go ahead and try the post method. So let's change this to post, and here in the body let's select row, and here let's select JSON, and let's add the details over here. So we need to pass the term and the interpretation. So let's type term, and I'll just type CSS and interpretation, and let's add something over here, styling language, and let's go ahead and click on send, and let's see whether this works. And we have this error failed to create interpretation. So let's go back to our source code, and let's go to the terminal, and here we have this error, and here we can see it says the current user is not authorized to perform the requested action. So for that you need to go back to AppWrite, and you need to go over here to settings, and let's scroll down, and you need to add the permissions over here. So let's click on this plus icon, and for now I'll just go ahead and select any, and let's add these permissions over here, and let's click on update, and now let's see whether this works. So let's go back to Postman, and let's send this request, and now we can see it says interpretation created. And let's go back to AppWrite, and let's go to documents, and let's reload this page, and we can see that the document has been added. We have CSS and this interpretation added over here. So the post method is working all right. Let's add one more data. So here let's change this to AppWrite, and here let's type backend as a service. So let's go ahead and send this, and let's go back, let's reload this page, and here we can see that both the data has been added. And now let's see whether the get method is working. So let's go over here to get, and let's change this to none, and let's click on send, and here we can see we have this response. We have the first object where we have the term interpretation, and then we have the ID and created at, updated at, and all these values over here. Let's scroll down, and we have CSS. So the get method is also working all right. Right now let's go back, and let's create the API routes for edit and delete. Now for edit and delete we need to get the ID as a parameter. So for that let's go to interpretations, and let's create a new folder called ID, and it will be inside square brackets because this is going to be dynamic, and in this we'll create a file called route.ts. And here also we need to add almost the same code. So I'll just copy these two lines of import from here, and we don't need to have the ID and the query, so I'll just remove these. And let's go ahead and create an instance of databases. So I'll just copy this line of code and let's paste it over here. Right now, let's create a function to fetch a specific interpretation. So let's tap async function and let's call it fetch interpretation. And here we'll get the ID and it'll be of type string. And let's add a try catch. And here in the try, let's type const interpretation equals await database dot get document. And here we need to pass the database ID, the collection ID, and the ID. So let's copy these two and let's paste it over here. And then we need to pass this ID. So let's tap ID over here. And let's go ahead and return interpretation. And here in the catch, let's tap console.error, error fetching interpretation. And let's pass the error over here. And let's throw new error. Let's tap failed to fetch interpretation. And let's go ahead and create a function for deleting the interpretation. So let's create a comment. Let's tap delete a specific interpretation. And let's tap async function delete interpretation. And let's pass the ID over here, which is of type string. And here let's type try catch. And here let's type const response equals await database dot delete document. And in this we need to pass the database ID, the collection ID, and the ID. So let's copy these and let's paste it over here. And let's go ahead and return the response. And here in the catch, I'll just copy these two lines of code and let's paste it over here. And let's tap error deleting interpretation and failed to delete interpretation. And now let's go ahead and create one more for updating. So I'll just copy this and paste it down here. I'll just change this to update. And let's change the function name to update interpretation. And here instead of delete document, we need to type update document. And here we need to pass the database ID, collection ID, and the ID. And then we also need to pass the data. So I'll just call it data and let's get it from here. So let's type data. And the data type will be object with term string and interpretation string. Right now, let's go ahead and create the get, delete, and put functions. So let's tap export default function get, and here we will get the request. So it will be of type request, and then we'll also get the ID from here. So for that we need to type params, and it will be of type params, ID of type string. So you need to add this code. So with this we will get the ID from the params. And here let's go ahead and add a try catch. And here let's type const ID equals params.id. And let's go ahead and type const interpretation equals await. And let's call this function called fetch interpretation. And let's pass the ID over here. And we are getting this error over here because we need to add async. And this will not be a default function. Right now, let's go ahead and return a next response .json. And here just type interpretation. Right now, let's go ahead and add the error message. So let's type return next response .json. And here let's type error failed to fetch interpretation. And let's also send the status code of 500. Right now, let's go ahead and copy this. And let's create one for delete. So let's tap delete over here. And here also we'll get the request and the params. And here we need to call the function delete interpretation. And I'll just go ahead and call it directly. And here I'll just send a message. And let's tap interpretation deleted. And here in the error message, let's type failed to delete. And now let's go ahead and copy it one more time for update. And for the update, we need to use the put function. And for the update, we'll also get the data in the request. So I'll just store the data inside this interpretation constant. So let's tap await req.json. And now let's call the update interpretation function, which is this one right here. So let's type await update interpretation, and let's pass the ID and the interpretation, and let's return a message. Let's type interpretation updated, and here let's type failed to update interpretation. And now let's see whether this works. So let's go back to Postman, and here let's go ahead and get the ID of AppWrite from here. So let's copy this ID and let's paste it over here after interpretations, and let's click on send. Now we can see that the AppWrite data is being displayed over here. And now if we go ahead and copy the ID of CSS, and if I paste it over here, and if I click on send, we get the CSS term displayed over here. So the get method is working alright for single interpretations. Now let's try the put method. So let's change this to put, and here we need to go to row, and here we need to add the data. So let's change this to CSS updated, and let's copy the interpretation and let's paste it over here, and here also I'll just type updated. So now this is the updated data. So let's click on send. Now we can see it says interpretation updated. So now let's go back to AppWrite, and if I reload this page, we can see that it says updated. So the data is updated. If you go back to Postman, and if you go over here to interpretations, and if I select get, we can see that the updated data is being displayed over here. So the put method is working alright. Now the last thing we need to check is the delete method. So let's delete this AppWrite interpretation from here. So I'll just copy this ID and let's paste it over here, and let's select the delete method, and I'll just set this body to none, and let's click on send. And now we can see it says interpretation deleted. And if I go back over here, and if I select get and click on send, we can see that we have just one term over here. So if you go back to AppWrite, here we can see that AppWrite was deleted from this collection. So the delete method is also working alright. And with that, we have completed creating the API of our application. So you can also add API interpretations over here, and you will get this data over here. Alright, so we have completed creating the API. From the next video, we will start connecting the API to this front end. Alright, so that's basically it for this video. If you have any doubts, you can ask in the comments below. And if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel to get the latest video updates. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.